What's up, y'all? We are still in the midst of Lobotomy Kaisen. There has been no news on the JJK 259 leaks, and if you've seen any leaks, those are just fake, people clout chasing, so don't pay any attention to that. But in the meantime here, I figured we could keep busy by answering a few questions, so let's dive into it. And let's just start with this lobotomy-ass question from Lynn, who wants to know if it's fair to say that our goat Sukuna has been acting in self-defense ever since his reincarnation. And you know what? I think with the right lawyer, like we get Saul Goodman on the case, then I think we could put up a pretty good defense based on self-defense. Because aside from Shibuya, and that's a pretty big aside, but, he kind of went crazy there. But aside from that, everybody's been picking a fight with him, really. So, I think there's something there. Next up, we got this question from Yat Lord, who wants to know if I think Sukuna has ever truly tried to take out Yuji. That on some level, could he maybe be holding back, trying to push Yuji to his full potential? And no, I don't think so. I think that hate for Yuji is real, and Sukuna absolutely has been trying to take that man out. I think even in a recent chapter, when Choso was helping Yuji with his RCT, helping him to heal, they even mentioned like 4 separate attacks that Yuji has taken that like should have been lethal if he didn't know RCT. And yeah, I do understand the angle you're coming from, but no, I think Sukuna truly does hate Yuji. Next up, we got this message from Dip, and he just wanted to let it be known that he's got the prediction that Choso is not long for this world. And I honestly agree with that. I feel like Choso is one of the most prime candidates to be taken off the board for like the most emotional and narrative impact at this point. Obviously, it would devastate Yuji, and Choso's whole character has been about looking for that redemption and also living for his brothers, right? So Choso is absolutely going to jump on the proverbial grenade in order to help Yuji, help his brother, and also redeem himself. Now, I disagree that you say he's unredeemable. I do think there is redemption for Choso, but I don't think he's making it out of this. So I'm with you here. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be in the next 2 chapters. Like, I don't want to call my shot to that extent, but especially with, staring down the scope of this fire arrow, it could very well be next chapter. But yeah, long story short, I too think Choso is, on the clock. And speaking of the fire arrow, next up we got this from Chance, who says, theory, Sukuna's curse technique consumes what he slashes for the fire. So I think I'm following what you're saying here, but please feel free to elaborate in the comments or shoot me a DM, because I know you're limited on Cash App. But if you're just saying that Sukuna's curse technique, involves consumption in order to power these abilities, then I agree. I do think that absolutely we are going to see Sukuna eat something, and that's going to be involved in this technique. Like, maybe it's how he adds things to the shrine, maybe it's how he gains as much cursed energy as he has. I don't know. So if that's what you're saying, I'm with you there. But if you're saying like literally, does he need to like slice things with cleave and dismantle to be able to use the fire arrow? I don't think that's the relationship necessarily, but I do think there is this overarching connection between all of these things. So again, please feel free to elaborate if I'm kind of missing the point on what you meant, but I think we're on the same page. Next up, we got this question from Lisa, and since it's a longer one, let me move out of the way for anybody that wants to pause and read the whole thing. But the question basically boils down to, if this theory that Gojo could come back by sacrificing his 6 eyes, what would that mean for him? What would he look like without the 6 eyes, but still the limitless? And honestly, he is going to be severely nerfed if this is the way this happens, because the 6 eyes, like you mentioned down here, are pretty much necessary to properly use the limitless. And that's because the 6 eyes give you a ton of processing power and information, right? But also just precise control of cursed energy. Gojo barely uses any when he activates a technique, but if he doesn't have those anymore, he is going to be chugging through his cursed energy, just trying to do simple things with the limitless. So he is going to be far, far weaker. Like, he won't be able to do basically anything really that he did before. And if he can do it, it's going to be on such a smaller scale. So, I don't think he could really do the domain expansion in the same way, because the 6 eyes, I feel like, are a fundamental part of Unlimited Void. I don't think he's going to be able to teleport the same way, at least not far. And, maybe he could imbue his punches with blue, since that doesn't seem like too extreme. But again, it's just going to drain him of his cursed energy so much. And then for your second question here on how did the Gojo clan maintain its status even when they don't have a six eyes user around, because it can be hundreds of years between appearances of the six eyes. And I think it's basically just because their station was like already cemented at that point. They already had a seat at the table, and so they would have wielded like tremendous political power if nothing else. Now I'm sure, there would have been turmoil and backstabbing and, just political strife in general. But just since they were already at the table as one of the three big clans, because they all kind of became established at the same time, and most assuredly under the leadership of a Six Eyes user at the time. I think they just kind of made their place in the world, and then they just had this kind of nuke in their back pocket at all times, right? Like, yeah, they might not have a Six Eyes user right now, but for all we know, he could be born tomorrow. And are we really trying to make enemies of that clan with the most powerful, person on the planet in it, basically? So I think it was kind of just, like this mutually assured destruction kind of idea, but also just because of the political power they wielded, even without the six eyes. And continuing on the Gojo train, we have this question from Silver, who wants to know how broken Gojo would be with an open domain expansion. And that's certainly a scary thought, right? Because you're taking Gojo and you're giving him yet another thing. But in reality, I don't think it changes much because it's Gojo, right? He can already handle everybody not named Sukuna. Like, he wins a domain clash against everybody already, and he was tied in refinement with Sukuna. So if we're assuming that Gojo's open domain would be more refined, and so that gives him the edge over Sukuna all of a sudden, then that's obviously a big deal, but I don't necessarily know if that equates. And other than that, the open domain, it just doesn't do much for him because, yeah, it's got a bigger range, but Gojo doesn't really need a bigger range, right? Because if anything, he's probably trying to minimize damage when he's using the domain. He's rarely using it against more than one person intentionally, I'd say. But if you throw him in a hypothetical scenario where he needs to, catch a ton of people in the domain, then yeah, certainly the open domain is going to get him there even quicker. So, conceptually terrifying for Gojo to have this, but in reality, I don't know how much extra use he would get out of that compared to where he's at right now. Unless it helps in the Sukuna domain clash, which it certainly might, but since they were already equal, I don't know how much it would. And then for your second question about the merger, I think the Megami Sukuna distinction is really important and intentional on Gege's part. It opens up some really interesting possibilities for what could happen, determining on what happens with Megami, right? Does he continue to go off the deep end, lose his mind, give up, or are they able to retrieve him and save him? But yeah, it could just be that Sukuna activates it and he's in Megami's body, so that's why that distinction was there. But again, it's ripe for some kind of juicy moments if Gege decides to go in that direction. Next up, we got this question from Vinegar on how strong are the old antagonists compared to now? Could the current group take on the disaster curses or Geto with his full curse army? So this is interesting because the cast has definitely progressed. So I'm not sure if you're asking, is this like a big group battle where it's the main cast versus all of those enemies at once? Because if so, I think the good guys win. But if we're going like a one-on-one basis with each of these characters versus each of these enemies, then I think of the guys we've got left now, I think Yuta Okotsu, Yuji, and Maki stomp all of them. The other ones, it's hard to say. So for Kusakabe, Ino, and Choso, and I might be forgetting somebody, I think all of them, Hakari, I think they could struggle. Like, I don't think any of those people can take out Hakari, but I don't know how much he could take out for them either. So again, Yuji, Yuta, Maki, Sweep, the other two are going to be closer, mainly because of domain expansions, but we do know everybody has simple domain at least now, so I think those are tough. Next, Velo wants to know who I would classify as special grade, and not many, because you gotta remember the definition we're given for special grade is a sorcerer that could take on a country by themselves. So even if you're supremely powerful, you may just not have the means to do that, right? So I would say the main four were already told, Gojo, Yuta, Yuki, and Geto, and I'm gonna throw in current Yuji, Sukuna obviously, Uraume, probably Rozu, and I forgot to mention Kinjaku when I said Geto, but obviously Kinjaku as well. And finally, we got this question from Crimson, who wants to know if Yuta could have copied the soul swap technique and given everyone some additional swaps during the training. And no, I don't believe it works this way. This was confusing when the early translations came out, but now that we've gotten some better ones, the limitation on this soul swap is on the individual being swapped. So Uui doesn't have a limit of swapping twice. He can swap as many times as he needs to. It's just any individual person can't do it more than twice. So adding Yuta wouldn't aid them in this regard. That's all for this one. Thank you for watching.